I'm still recording these so that if you do miss a class, they are online. However, I will acknowledge that to this point, the recordings have not been great. I'm trying to get the camera where I need it and the mic where I need it and get them all. So they're there for the first lectures if you need a review or whatnot, but just kind of take it with a grain of salt. So we're figuring that out. So we left off this notion that if you inflame the mob too much, you're playing with fire. And this is something I think we have to reconcile the American Revolution. I once did a study and ended up running a paper in my grad school on what was more revolutionary, the American Revolution or the Constitutional Convention of 1787. In my humble estimation, it's the Constitutional Convention. I don't think America begins as anything really unique or different until the Constitutional Convention. The American Revolution carried a lot of sentiment that a lot of other revolutions did, but we began to see a framework emerge in the American Revolution that does guide where we end up. But the same mob that led into the revolution almost destroyed our nation before we ever had a chance of really solidifying ourselves. And this becomes a problem because it means we have to reconcile this narrative. So what happens in this event? March 5th, 1770, you have a group of soldiers get caught in one of the colonial streets, right, in Boston. And what happens is there's a violent engagement between the American colonists and effectively the policing force, right? So the soldiers represent the police. And what happens here is you have a violent encounter, the colonists are shot, 5 colonists are shot dead, and the soldiers are immediately ridiculed, are immediately ostracized, and they're cast aside. Now, what happens is immaterial to an extent to what happens after the event. Because so many Americans say, well, we demand justice, and we want to build a just society and a righteous society. Well, if that's the case, then what was the proper response to this event? Guys, how many people were actually at this event? Not many. How many cameras did we have at this event? I'll give you none. Why not? Yeah, literally weren't there. So all we have coming out of this event are what? Newspaper. Musings of the people and what the newspapers told us about it. Who's in charge of the newspaper that circulated this? If I give this to the mob, if I print this image in the American colonists, now the American colonists, this image is going to be, everybody's going to want this. If this is what happened, and I print this, what's going to happen to the newspaper? Everyone being sold. Doesn't matter if it's true. Well, it just so happens that this was published and circulated by none other than noble American patriot Paul Revere. Guys, the terrorist group known as the Sons of Liberty, led by Paul Revere, Sam Adams, and the like, were nothing but radicals in American history. They were nothing but radicals. When you actually look at their history, look at what they did, right? They were the ones stimulating the mob, profiting from the mob a lot. They were the ones playing with fire, right, a lot of the time. They were the ones that said, no, this is what happened, and it's bad, and it's vile. And they even attach a poem to it, unhappy Boston, see thy sons deplore thy hallowed walks with guiltless gore, while faithless in his savage bands with murderous rancor stretch their bloody hands. What are we doing here? We're creating this imagery that the American colonists are collectively good, and the evilness is here. Guys, look at how we portray the British. All the faces, vile. They're almost, look at this guy right here. He's like, I'm enjoying this. Captain Prescott back here saying, fire, fire. We're painting an image. And whether you like it or not, these images are powerful. We're doing this because we want, and we're sending them towels. And if we can inflame the mob against the British, then it becomes ill-advised for the British to continue doing this. If it's more burdensome to have the tax and not, then the idea is to rescind the tax and not fight all these battles. But what happens when you implant in the mind of the people the fact that you are in a society with police officers that you cannot trust, with police officers that would rather gun you down than protect you? Is there any coming out of this without violence? But we are good and they are bad. We are just and they are unjust. We are righteous and they are all evil. Notice the groupings. Notice on the college side, it's always a peaceful protest. Guys, it's always a peaceful protest. Modern America, it's always a peaceful protest. 8 people died, but it's a peaceful protest. I think we need to redefine what we mean by peace. The narrative is not accidentally constructed. There's an argument here. And here's the reality. The Sons of Liberty wanted to round up those soldiers that night and hang them from the Tree of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty wanted to hang those soldiers that night without trial, without order, without any criminal proceedings. Just hang them up. They are already guilty in our kangaroo court. Guys, what happens if America begins that way? What happens if Americans hang these soldiers that night? What do you think Britain does to us if we get away with that? You think Britain's going to just sit back and allow 8 soldiers to be hung in the middle of Boston? The hammer would have come down so hard on us. But we're not thinking rationally. We're mad. We're upset. We're justified in our anger. Now, why is all this important? It's important because the soldiers aren't hung at night. Reason prevailed. We put them in prison. We put them in confinement. And we actually have a trial. There's actually a history of the trial. There's records. There's evidence. We have it. And oddly enough, while one of the Adams is over here, Sam Adams, saying, hang them the soldiers tonight, another Adams, a lawyer, right, a noble, upstanding individual that wanted to fight for truth and justice, was petitioned by the soldiers to defend them. Guys, the soldiers didn't get a British lawyer. They believed that if they got a British lawyer, they would already be tainted because the British lawyer will overwhelmingly bend the narrative they're in. They tried to get a lawyer from Boston, a colonial lawyer, to defend them. Adams, John Adams, said, no, I'm not going to defend you. I have to work in Boston. This would ruin my reputation to defend you. And the soldier said, just look at the evidence. And if you're not convinced by the evidence that we're innocent, then don't defend us. Adams looked at the evidence and was convinced the soldiers were innocent. They performed their duty. There was no wrongdoing. What happened that night facing the evidence, Captain Prescott was actually not behind his men. He was actually in front of his men. Eyewitness accounts said Captain Prescott was there saying, fire, fire, damn you, fire, kill them all. And it came up in the court case. Why would Captain Prescott command his soldiers to fire if he was standing in front of the guns? So if Captain Prescott wasn't yelling, fire, fire, damn you, fire, who was? There were colonists arguing that. Why would the colonists be yelling for the soldiers to fire? Why would rational people line up in front of an armed mob and say, yeah, fire, kill me, shoot? In the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, terrorist groups would develop a policy, a practice of giving realistic-looking weapons to young people, to kids, and have them run towards American soldiers. Why? Why would they do that? Because the first time an American soldier shoots an Afghan kid down, what did you just win? You won the movie battle. I just need one soldier acting stupidly. I just need one soldier urinating on the Quran. That's all it takes. And you've just elongated that war by 20 years. The narrative is powerful, whether we like it or not. It doesn't matter what the truth of the circumstance was. The narrative is powerful, and if you give way to the people's court, this is something that for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he says, the general will. Just allow the general will, allow the people to decide, allow us to come together and vote. But is the mob really that trustworthy? Even a mob of poor, oppressed people, are they really that trustworthy? Do we really think the mob holds that integrity? Or do we see time periods in history where the mob would willingly act unjustly? Not too quickly after the American Revolution with the French Revolution. Guys, the French Revolution is a Rousseauan experiment. It was actually inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, not purposely, but they took his ideas and ran with them. Kill the elite, okay. Off with the king and queen. Kill all the lords and duchesses, off with all their heads. But then this new kind of ruling elite, well, they all got killed too. And then the new ones, they got killed too. It became so bad we called it a reign of terror, of bloodshed running out of the streets of Paris before they could reestablish order with Napoleon. Ironically, what began as a Rousseauan experiment ended up as somewhat of a confirmation of Hobbes. The American narrative did not go the same route as the French Revolution, and it's incumbent upon us as historians to ask ourselves why. What was different about America where we actually ended up with a different fate than France did? And a lot of the reality is because we had men and women stand up in times of difficulty against their peers, against the mob, against the will of the mob, and say, wait, not so fast, reason should prevail. If we're going to build a just nation, then we have to orient ourselves towards justice. We can't simply respond and act out of anger. We have to think things through. John Adams, in his final arguments of the Boston Massacre, gave this kind of line of defense. He says, the law and all vicissitudes of government, fluctuations of passions, or flights of enthusiasms will preserve a steady and undeviating course. It will not bend to the uncertain wishes, imaginations, and wanton tempers of men. The law no passion can disturb. 'Tis void of desire and fear, lust and anger. 'Tis means sin effectu. Right? Means sin effectu is Latin. That means mind without passion. Right? The law has to be consistent, steady, always applicable, never seeing individuality. Because it has to remain pure. It cannot bend. It is, in effect, written reason, retaining some measure of, do not discount that word, divine. Guys, what is Adam saying here? The law carries a divine? Who is divine? God. But the law should carry a mirror of God. The law should be perfect and pure. The law should guide us. It does not enjoy that which pleases weak and frail men, but that in regard to person commands that which is good and punishes evil and all. Who are you hearing here? Which philosopher are you hearing here? The law should carry divine overtone. It should command that which is good. It should punish that which is bad. Which philosopher are you like, ooh, ooh. I mean, it used to be Locke, that's Locke. Locke, right? It commands that which is good and punishes evil. Now notice the next line. It says, on one hand, it is deaf, inexorable, and flexible. On the one hand, it is inexorable to the cries and limitations of the prisoners. On the other hand, it is deaf as an adder to the clamors of the populace. Guys, that is a clear rejection of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The law is blind and deaf to the clamors of the populace. You cannot let the mob determine what is right. Now, is he right? I don't know. If you're a Rousseauan, you would argue against Locke here. You would argue against that. No, the people should decide. The people, let's just get around and vote. Not too long ago, we had the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson, Missouri. Michael Brown, the argument was gunned down by a police officer. The police officer was put in prison, had a trial, the grand jury there, then released the prisoner, says there's not enough evidence to convict him. Ferguson, Missouri was then downtown burned to the ground. And outright protest and violence. The people had their will. The Obama Justice Department later went into Ferguson, Missouri and said, I want to look at this. I think there's corruption. I think the police got it wrong. I want to see the files. The Obama Justice Department then produced an entire report on whether or not there was any argument against the cop or whether or not the cop was justified. And the Obama Justice Department concluded that the cop was justified. that Michael Brown was actually physically attacking him, had reached into the police car and tried to grab his gun. That it wasn't self-defense. The hands up, don't shoot never happened. That was actually concocted by a friend. He wasn't shot in the back. That was something else. That most of the narratives that ran wild were completely concocted, that the ballistics report did not actually confirm. The autopsies didn't confirm. Again, it doesn't matter what's true to the mob. How often do we just run with narratives? And I had so many students in class that were Crosby, he was. And I asked them one simple question. You know the only question you have to ask somebody in that situation? It was, Crosby was. Were you there? Guys, you know the effectiveness of eyewitness testimony? You know we've stopped using eyewitness testimony in court proceedings. You know why? Because even if you were there, your memory of the event is rarely accurate. Your brain automatically fills in the gaps that you don't remember. So if I have 5 people watch the same event, I'm going to get 5 different stories of that event based on what they remember of the event and based on what their brain has concocted about the gaps that they don't remember. And so if I'm going to construct an event, I have to take the 5 narratives and try to figure out where they overlap and the consistencies of the narrative, and that's about all I can confirm, absent some type of ballistics or forensics report or whatnot. And even your ballistics and forensics get a little bit messy because a lot of times those are tampered with. So when we have this narrative of just trust the people, as Adam says, we can't trust the people in 1770. And I would argue to this day, trusting the people is not a good idea. Why? Because kangaroo courts have always carried a bloodlust. They've always been quick to judgment. They very rarely, slowly, methodically think things through. Guys, even on Black Friday, we went from having Black Friday on a single day to now they've spread out an entire week. One of the reasons for that is marketing. Another reason is because we had literally people killed on Black Friday by being trampled to death. Trampled to death over what? A big screen TV for $200 off? And yet we have the audacity to say we value life. Be very careful. But I'm also going to show you that there is no shortage of people willing to stimulate the mob, willing to profit from the mob. One of them is Thomas Paine. Same year as the Declaration of Independence, 1776, we produced Common Sense, ironically labeled Common Sense. Thomas Paine offers us a common sense approach to government and existence. Ironically enough, very few elements that he says carries any logical sense. Most of it is absolute poppycock. If you actually look at common sense from a logical point of view, most of it's pandering. Most of it's rhetoric. Most of it is, I'm going to simply do this like this poetic license to spin narratives. A couple excerpts here. It says, as the government matters, it is not in the power of Britain to do this kind of justice. The business of it soon will be too weighty and intricate to be managed by any tolerable degree of convenience, by a power so distant from us and so very ignorant of us. For if they cannot conquer us, they cannot govern us. Whoa, time out. Thomas, did you just make the argument that the power to govern a people is consistent with the power to conquer a people? Because reciprocate that statement. So if I can conquer you, I can govern you. Guys, America could defend herself against France. You really think we can win a war against England? No, I just so many students look at me like, oh, we did, Crosby. We'll get there. We'll get there. It's kind of like accident chance in England largely underestimates us, right? We get away with one and they come back and kick our butts. We'll get to that later on in class, right? Nonetheless, guys, if you're a woman in the class, square this. If I can conquer you, I can govern you. How is this not the most misogynistic statement we could make? The masculine, the more powerful elite, will just do whatever we need to, suppress you, conquer you, and do whatever we want. Bend you to our narrative. Guys, this became a best-selling book in the American colonies. People didn't look at it logically. They didn't analyze the arguments. They didn't say, you know what is he saying here? Is he really saying that if they can conquer us, they can govern us? Is that what he's saying here? This is ludicrous. No, but then he gave us some nice poetry. He's like, everything that is right or natural. Notice natural and right. Like, everything that is right and natural pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature barred. The weeping voice. Can you hear it? Can you hear the weeping voice? Is that those annual commercials? Do you remember me? It's an emotional sensibility. It's an emotional sensibility. That's what's actually happening here. Paine's not giving us a lot of great theory. He's not giving us a lot of great political theory. He's pandering. Great patriot Patrick Henry, boldly declaring, hand in the air. This is an artistic representation, but if we see this kind of imagery, as he stands in the church congregation, boldly declaring, "It is vain, sir, to accentuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace." I'm going to give you a life lesson right now. If you want to be married for a long time, never, ever, 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 ever utter those words. Ever. If I go home to my wife and say, "It is vain, ma'am, there is no peace," what am I guaranteeing? Yeah, I'm guaranteeing a fight. As I promise you, in any relationship, whether it be with your spouse, your kids, your friends, if you go in looking for a fight, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get a fight. People that live peacefully are those that orient their being towards peace. Those that live peacefully orient their being towards peace. Patrick Henry has not done that. He has declared the war has already begun. We are already at war. And once we're already at war, right, why would you stand here idle? What is it that the gentleman would wish? What would they have? His life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? In other words, if you're not willing to fight this war I already said existed, you are a coward. You are not a man. You are not loyal. You are not a patriot. The war has begun. You will rise up and join us against them. And in such a way, you deny the universality of individuality. You deny the humanity of your enemy. You deny a path towards peace. You structure a very Rousseauan argument. We are the good guys, they are the bad guys. We need to rid our world of them. The war has already begun, and you are a coward if you don't join. You are pathetic. You are weak. It's powerful prose. Poetry, rather. But is it right? Guys, which one is more cowardly? Going along with the mob out of some desire or need to fit in? Or standing against the mob to do something you know is right? Which one's more cowardly, really? What do you feel most guilty about? The times you conformed? Or the times you stood up? Guys, we all carry things with us, demons from our past. And I will tell you, my personal experience, going along with the group never really is the more powerful thing. I still carry it to this day. I was a stupid 7th grader. We were out, football team, right? And the other popular kids on the football team started making fun of this, mentally ill individual. Wasn't all there, right? He was there enough to be the water boy, but not all there. And so what did I do? I didn't say anything. Made a couple jabs myself. Still remember that. Why? I don't know. Stays with you though. Patrick Henry says the strong will line up, the strong will conform. But what's right? What are we actually pursuing? As we're an American nation today, and now America's not 13, vulnerable colonies anymore. America is the most powerful nation in the world, but I guarantee you the mob is still active, the mob is still violent, and you have the choice of either running around the mob or asking the mob, wait, does this make sense? Wait, does this actually give us a path towards peace? Or wait, am I simply a pawn in somebody else's narrative, in somebody else's game? Am I simply being used for the profit of somebody else? Guys, if you don't think the NAACP profits from race, then you're not paying attention. If you don't think that there are groups in our nation that profit from the continual battle over abortion, you're not paying attention. If you don't think the LGBT debate is profitable, you're not paying attention. Whole thing on Target right now. Why would they go for Gay Pride Month? Well, you know why? Because we've hyped up that it's a good thing to do it. If you want to be prideful and gay, guess what? You need merchandise. What's Target doing? That's not a moral decision. They're selling you stuff. And guess what? It'll be broken by next year. So next year when the month rolls around again, guess what? They'll have a whole new crop of gay pride stuff for you to buy. You line up and do what you're told. Many of us haven't actually articulated the foundation of gender, foundation of homosexuality, heterosexuality, foundations of marriage, and the history of marriage inside. We haven't done that research. We've simply joined a group. And those groups pull us in. Mentioned earlier, no taxation of representation. Here's the problem. By 1775, the British government was consuming 1/5 of its citizens' GDP. So if you are a member of Britain living in England, you are getting taxed roughly 20% of your annual income. 20%. Right? Keep that in mind. 20%. So by the outbreak of war, Englanders were paying 20% in taxes. Meanwhile, New Englanders, those living, getting all mad and upset, New Englanders were only paying between 1% and 2% of their income in taxes. In other words, if you were a British citizen living in the United States, you are having an 18 to 19% difference in the taxes that you were paying to the less. And you were upset. Because a lot of times, you only make the argument because of all what you perceive. There's a great book my daughter's reading it right now by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And he is an Austrian Jew that was put into some of the harshest environments during the Holocaust. And it's interesting reading his perspective because he was getting out and kind of reflecting on the Holocaust. There's a picture of Jewish individuals in an infirmary. And another one of his friends, not part of the Holocaust, said, "Man, that must have been so terrible. How did y'all survive that?" And he kind of looked at the picture and he was like, "That was some of the best times. The period we spent there, we could relax, we could lay there, we could get better. Like we didn't mind that. It was all the other times not photographed that really got bad." A lot of what we do and the opinions that we construct are based on the perspective that we hold. If you want to understand yourself better, broaden your perspective. Read cultures, environments. How many Americans knew this at the time? They were being told the narrative, the taxes are oppressive, they're taxing us overwhelmingly. In fact, they weren't. British citizens were also weighed down with a national debt piled up by years of worldwide warfare that amounted to roughly 15 pounds for each of the crown's 8 million subjects. In other words, right, not only were they being taxed more, their economy was struggling because they just got out of a war. Oh wait, that was the 7 Years' War in which Britain helped defend us. We benefited from that war. Do we have an obligation to pay? Shouldn't we kind of say, hey, yeah, we should help pay. Yeah, we kind of benefited from that, you know. Thanks for sending all those soldiers and weapons and stuff. No, we shouldn't have to pay. Americans, local and colonial governments were all debt-free. Against this backdrop, Americans watched as British monarchy attempted to raise taxes on the colonists to pay down its war debt and pay for the 10,000 British soldier barracks in the colonies. He goes on. He says the bottom line, American colonists were both paid more and taxed less than the British. American taxes, in fact, were low and going lower, but the very idea that they had been raised and could be raised again by a distant power was enough to send Americans into the street to engage in civil disobedience. Regime change followed the tax revolt. Guys, this should inform a lot of us. If you play with fire, be very careful because somebody usually gets burned. And usually those that get burned are the ones trying to advocate change peacefully. You start looking at even the protests of how we go about change, how do we fix this? This is best in American history. How do we protest? And how do we protest with a reasonable expectation of change? We have completely butchered protest. When you start looking at even the civil rights movement, the 1950s, 1960s, we're like, well, we had to fight for our rights. Did you? Go look at the pictures. You know how many white people are in those protests, silently sitting by Martin Luther King? Have you examined the relationship between Billy Graham and Martin Luther King of saying, hey, I want to help. We need to end this difference. Where's any of the love for the massive numbers of white people in history that says, you know what, I'm going to risk my career, my life, my venue, my reputation to stand for this cause that I believe is right and just? When did we start believing that only the oppressed were able to do this? If you're oppressed fighting for your rights, okay, join the group, you've got sound cause. But if I'm a white person in the South with a great career and a great business, why the hell would I join your cause? And yet they did, in droves. Where are their stories? Where's that narrative? Where are the narratives saying that America exists not because the mob was allowed to protest and change? America exists because at times, when the mob became unstable, men and women emerged as leaders to tame the flames, to guide the flames, to push us to something more just and better. If you don't have that, you end up like France. Even the phrase no taxation of representation. If you look at the history of it, it's not even American. It was actually a British member of Parliament that first tabbed it, a British newspaper. In England, there can be no taxation of our representation and no representation without election. But it is undeniable that the representation of Great Britain are not elected for or by or for the Americans, therefore cannot represent them. And so, if Parliament of Great Britain has a right to tax America, that right cannot possibly be grounded in consideration that the people of Great Britain have chosen them their representatives, without which choice there would be no Parliament at all. In other words, the foundational argument of the American Revolution has nothing to do with taxation. It has everything to do with proper representation. I do not think it is taxes that frustrate us. Taxes hit us economically, and taxes are easy to attack with the mob. But when we really get frustrated, when the mob is saying, is when we feel like we're being treated as lesser citizens, which is exactly what's happening. We petitioned Great Britain and said, hey, let us have a seat at the table. Let us have a seat in Parliament. Give us a vote in Parliament. And the English citizens were like, hey, if we give the American colonists a seat in Parliament, we have to give all colonists a seat in Parliament, and they're not members. We can't do that. So no, America, you're a colonist, you're not Britain, you are lesser beings. You do what you're told. It was the suppression of the American voice. It was the suppression of the American representation. It was the suppression of the American ability to perfect themselves that leads to the revolution. We have to start teaching that better. Because even the cries of voices today, if we make it about taxation or all these other superficial issues, then we miss the point. The point is we still have racial struggle in the United States because for whatever reason, African Americans still do not feel like they have been adequately given a seat at the table. And when they have been, they feel like it's been misrepresented. That's something that we still have to compensate. Guys, whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. The reality is there's still a group of people that feels like they're being treated as second-rate lesser citizens. But if you're African American in the room, I'll tell you this as well. The greatest advancement of equality in the United States is when African Americans stopped acting like second-rate citizens. When they started to go toe for toe and said, no, I'm as intelligent, as smart, as brilliant, as refined. I will cite you on your own words, on your own text. I'm going to challenge that narrative. When I taught high school, I always taught my young men specifically, because young men overwhelmingly are far more likely to get in trouble with the law. Right? Specifically young black men, but young men overwhelmingly. And every time I give them, like, yeah, but Crosby, what if they're wrong? What if they're just wrong? What if they shouldn't be getting on me? I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they do. What they do is on them. When you're being disrespected, you have one of two options. You can either confirm their opinion about you, or you can challenge their opinion about you. That's it. That's all you can do. When Britain looks at America and they said, you're backwards, terrible people, you don't know what it is to govern, and we have the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, and we have all the Sons of Liberty running around with like sticks, like, ah! What is Britain interpreting there? What do they see? See? We told you, you're just a bunch of stupid people running around with pitchforks. You're not ready to rule. Because whether you like that or not, as long as the protest looks like stupid people running around with pitchforks, you're never going to gain any successes. You have to articulate a different narrative. The American colonists have to rise to the occasion. So what do? A group of men get together in Philadelphia in 1776, and they rise to the occasion. They said, if we're going to have a just cause in this war, if we're going to set America on any kind of stable foundation, if we're going to show the world that we have legitimacy, then we have to do this right. At the time, they had petitioned the king for redress. We often leave this out of the American narrative. They do. They say, please, petition, please, give us a seat at the table. We don't want to fight. We don't want to fight. The mob is out there saying, fight, destroy, kill them all. And our leaders are like, wait, no. We don't want to fight them. They're the most powerful nation in the world. You don't even have an army. When we need to make loans, who are we going to get loans for to even fight them? It's absolutely asinine to go to war with Britain. The mob is set on war. Our leaders are trying to say, no, wait. But the fire is burning. And once the fire burns, the king is like, you are subjects. You need to be controlled. You are subjects. You need to be put down. And a group of men get together in 1776 and say, wait, we're more than that. We want to be more than that. We can be more than that. And they articulate the single greatest breakup letter in all of human history. True story, the Declaration of Independence is nothing more or less than an eloquent breakup letter. That's all it is. We are breaking up with England. The unanimous declaration of 13 United States of America, the unanimous 13 states pulled together, right, to break up together. Notice, prior to this moment, we do not have unification of the colonies. Prior to this moment, we have 13 independent autonomous colonies doing what they wanted to. But if they're going to win this battle, they have to unify. The common enemy kind of pulls them together temporarily, simply to fight this battle. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands to connect them to another. In other words, when it becomes necessary to break up with you, you are my government, you are my government no more, right? And then, if I'm breaking up with you, I'm going to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, right? In other words, I'm breaking up with you because God has dignified my existence and given me the right to pursue my own happiness, even if it means separate from you. In those two lines, which philosopher are we rejecting? Who are we rejecting there? Overwhelmingly. If I have Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, and I've already rejected Rousseau at the Boston Massacre, who am I rejecting in the first line here? Hobbes. Why?
Because basically it states that the sovereign is just not adequate.
Absolutely. In Hobbes' world, the worst thing you can do is to rebel against the sovereign, because you're returning to a state of nature. And the Americans are leading like, we're going to rebel. If the first thing is rebellion, we're not in Hobbes' world anymore. They're accepting the reality that they could reasonably govern themselves without a sovereign. We're rejecting Hobbes. But notice what they say next. Nature and nature's God. Who else does that confirm for us? If we're talking the law of nature and nature's God, whose philosophy is coming out there? It should be Locke. But notice the next line. The decent respect for the opinions of mankind requires that we should declare the Constitution held in separation. I've asked students this a lot, and I'll ask you on a bi-weekly assessment. Pay attention. Who did we write the Declaration to? Everybody thinks the King of England. Is there anywhere in this document that says to the King of England? No. Who is this document written to? The people of a decent respect to the opinions of. We are writing a manifesto of right behavior for all men at all times, in all places. We are asserting a narrative that says this is true not just for us, but for all people at all times, that should forever exist. We are not just claiming something is true that's unique to our circumstances here. We are claiming that something is true that would reasonably apply to all people at all times. So if anybody looks at the plight of the Americans, they would see that we have just cause. That is a bold statement. By any stretch of the imagination, that is a bold statement. You have a group of Americans, ragtag, separated from the world, saying, no. I've read what you've read, I've studied what you've studied. I've looked at all the arguments and all the analysis. And this is what's right. It's bold. So what does he go here? Well, we have to tell him our argument. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Guys, truth is a fun little word. Truth means true. Truth means absolute. Truth means universal. Right? I always have shows like Crosby, there is no truth. You know the number one thing you have to answer that or to combat that? There is no truth. Is that true? Well, there is nothing real. Is that real? If there is no truth, then there is no truth. Everything is happenstance and circumstance and accident. So our founding fathers are leading with, no, there are certain things that are true. There are certain things that are universal. There are certain things that are absolute. And we must orient ourselves towards that absolute. That we don't get to create truth. We don't get to make it up as we go. It is what it is prior to our existence, and it will remain what it is after our existence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident is a fun little word. What they mean by self-evident means obvious when one looks upon it. So self-evident isn't like everybody knows it, but self-evident is a term that says once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right? It's like if you've lived your entire life in a cave, you're never going to know what the sun looks like. But the moment you walk outside of the cave and look up, you're going to be like, oh dear God, this is obvious. That's what we mean by self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, right? So the basis of human equality is given here. Once again, we're like, yeah, but Crosby, they had slaves. How can they demand equality? I understand that. That's what I'm going to argue in class, that America may not have practiced it right. It didn't mean they didn't get it right. You can believe that we should be honest people and that lying is wrong. It doesn't mean you don't lie. You violate your own narrative a lot every single day. So did they. But ask yourself, when African Americans were claiming that they were free and equal citizens, whose words did they lean on? Did they not argue that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? When women were declaring equality in our nation, what argument were they making? Was it not that we are endowed by our Creator certain inalienable rights, and among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? The modern groups claiming equality today, what argument are they making? Is it not that we are endowed by our Creator certain inalienable rights? Just because we didn't get the practice of it right, didn't mean they were wrong. Guys, even Jefferson owned slaves. And late in his life, he wrote his personal diaries. He says, I pray God is not just. Because if God is just, and we are to account for what we have done. Jefferson struggled. He agonized over this. But the reality is, once slavery takes hold of the South, everything in the South is economics. And if Jefferson ever frees his slaves, his economics are destroyed, therefore his very status is destroyed, therefore his very availability to be at the conference to write this document goes away. We could look at history and judge it, or we can look at history and try to understand it. Jefferson is here, and he's giving us an argument. Doesn't mean he's perfect in practice, but he's giving us an argument. We have to determine, is there validity to his argument? Is this an argument worth defending? Because if all men are created equal, and they're endowed for the credit of human rights, right? My argument as a parent is, if this argument is right, then what authority do I hold over my kids naturally? In my estimation, none. My kids are autonomous beings given equality by God. So I have to treat them as autonomous beings. I can't look at my kids as simply extensions of my being and I have some kind of authority because they share my genes. I simply have to say, you are endowed by God with certain inalienable rights. Among those rights is your life, your choices, your pursuit of happiness. So what do you get to do with your life? It's your life. It's a key thing with my kids. Right? You get to decide. I'm a fierce defender of autonomy with my kids. Daughter asked me one time if she wanted to color her hair. Not a big fan of hair color for a lot of reasons. We won't get into class. She's like, Dad, I want to color my hair. I'm like, okay. For me, it's just it's a waste of money for me. I'm like, be you. But my daughter's like, I really want to cut my hair. Do you think I can? I'm like, first off, I wouldn't spend the money that way. But your life, your hair. Do what you do. And so she does. She colors her hair, and she comes back. She goes, Hey, Dad, do you like it? And I look at her, I'm like, no, I don't like it. Right? I like your real hair color. I like your authentic hair color. But I'm proud of your willingness to do something even though I didn't like it. And you knew in advance I didn't like it. I'm proud of your ability to go and, challenge, figure it out. You didn't know. I knew what I liked and didn't like. You didn't. You be you. So I'm proud of you. Grow it out. Figure out what you want to do. Right? You're not going to judge me. It doesn't shift if I like you or love you. It's hair. Guys, when you start looking at autonomy, what does that mean? We're not saying this is true now. We're true of all mankind. If you actually begin wrapping your head around this argument, it should frame how we interact with people. That you have your life and your choices and your pursuit of happiness. I cannot make you happy. Teachers today, well, if we just put the right environment, every student will learn. If I just put a target on the board, every student will learn. And if we're just emotionally sensitive, guys, the reality is you can't do that. There's no environment everywhere where I can even halfway pretend to control you. You are your autonomous being. You will learn in my class to the extent that you choose to learn. That's it. That's the grand summation of it. And if you don't want to learn, if you don't choose to learn, if you don't choose to come to class prepared and ready to learn, then you're not going to learn. Am I responsible for that? No. People are like, well, if they don't learn in class, I didn't learn anything in class. I learned more outside of class than I learned inside of class. I took my learning personally. I said, no, I want to learn. I get it. I am an individual with choices, and my happiness is mine and mine alone. Guys, if you actually wrap your head around this, can you ever say, well, I'm unhappy because of them? They're the source of my unhappiness. Can you ever say that? No. If you're unhappy, whose fault is it? Yours. Yours. If somebody needs to change, do we need to sit back and demand that others change? Or do we have effectively control over a single individual? Guys, if you're ready for change, and as Michael Jackson said, start with the man in the mirror. Or the woman in the mirror. Or the person in the mirror. Whatever you want to frame that. Our founding fathers argued that we're going to build a nation where you are in control of you. And the government only confines you to the extent that's necessary to protect the natural rights of other people. As long as you leave other people alone, have at. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So the consent of the governed gives the government power, and the government only has power to the extent that the people consent. Right? And that's where a lot of people say, well, yeah, this is why we have democracy, Crosby. Not necessarily, because a consent